Today I've got a fairly simple build, but I think it's a good one to examine in depth because there are a lot of justifiable gear choices to discuss. So the premise of this build is simple. I wanted to get the most out of the pressure point mutator. And when it comes to maximizing this mutator, the important thing to know is that it has a singular damage type, explosive. And this means we can use it with Summoner to increase its damage from the Dominator damage perk. But to complete this build and actually make Summoner worth picking over something like the top dog in terms of damage buffing in Ritualist with Death Wish, we need to pick the right supporting tools that take full advantage of Summoner's mod and explosive damage bonuses. For example, if we go with something like Concussive Shot, which does play perfectly with what Pressure Point wants you to do, which is get in point blank range. It does fit this pattern very nicely, but we'd be leaving a lot of damage on the table because Concussive Shot only counts as mod damage, not explosive, and Pressure Point only counts as explosive damage, not mod damage. So only half of Summoner's damage increase would be applying to either one of our damage sources, and we'd get a lot more out of just using Ritualist with Death Wish to give both of them 75% more damage. So what ends up making Summoner a justifiable pick is when we start going into explosive mods, since its damage perk is going to give us almost as much additive damage as Ritualist with Death Wish, but with no maintenance. We still do lose out on damage from Pressure Point since it's only getting 35% more damage instead of 75%, but at this point the gap in our overall damage is much smaller, and it becomes worth considering Summoner over Ritualist since we only sacrifice a small amount of damage in exchange for not having to devote significant resources to maintaining Death Wish uptime, which gives us a lot more flexibility and makes this build very accommodating of alternative trinket choices. So Archon is obviously our prime archetype because we're spamming mods, and now that I've established the reasoning behind the choice of Summoner over like the most competitive alternative, we can get into the details. So when considering mod choice, right away we're down to two main options for the mod we're going to use with Pressure Point, since requiring you to be in point blank range really does not work well with most explosives. Rotten Arrow has a delayed explosion and a relatively small AoE, so like you could use this, but its damage is just awful and I would just stay away. The better option is Helix, which has much higher damage, and it also has, like, it can't friendly fire and stagger you, which is the most important thing we're looking for. For our secondary mod, we want something that stays around and deals damage over time, and Flying Bomb Trap is the only explosive option that fits these criteria, and it also deals substantial damage when it isn't suffering from randomly deciding that it doesn't want to shoot. When we combine this with Stone of Malevolence and Feedback, this gives us a lot of mod power to work with to spam Helix with Pressure Point. And another benefit of Flying Bomb Trap is that it also does not stagger you or deal friendly fire. All of our damage being explosive is going to let us go into Detonation Trigger as the amulet. From there you can build crit like this with Akari Warband and Burden of the Gambler to further boost the direct damage of your mods. Pressure Point itself cannot crit, so you can go with more additive damage with Burden of the Destroyer and Blasting Cap Ring. Overall though, I prefer to go with crit because it gives you more damage if you're outside of Pressure Point range, plus the yellow numbers are just satisfying, but both of them are valid options. You could also even just go into more health and damage reduction with these ring slots, but if you know me, I'm always going to favor some more damage, especially when we have so many free trait points to get to an acceptable amount of bulk for general play. In terms of the gun we're going to stick Helix on, the Sparkfire Shotgun is the best choice because we already want to use Stone of Malevolence, and this is the only innately elemental weapon with an open mod slot. For the rest of the trinkets, Burden of the Follower is not strictly necessary, but the extra mod power generation really helps. You could instead go with Burden of the Mariner, since we don't really care about skill uptime, but that also requires like using your summoner skill to put it on cooldown, and personally I find that the minions just get in the way and generally make things more annoying, and I think it really says a lot that I'm personally more willing to put up with the substantial downside of Burden of the Follower than I am with these dumb meatballs just getting in the way. If you're going to use minions though, Burden of the Mariner is definitely the better pick here. For the Relic, we're going with Profane Heart because we already have passive healing from regrowth, and for the Relic, Fragments mod damage is obvious, and we don't have any options to increase pressure point damage. Elemental damage is always a safe option since it helps Flying Bomb Trap and Sparkfire Shotgun as well as your dots, even though the dots aren't really the focus here. The other main option is mod cost reduction, and personally it's what I've come to prefer because being able to spam more just makes things feel better to play when you're a mod build. This does lose you damage from pressure point since we end up lowering the cost of Helix below a multiple of 100, so we're going to go from 765 mod power cost to 680, and since pressure point is based on thresholds of 100 mod power spent, this does lose us damage. But you can make this up just by casting more with your reduced cost, and really I think the main benefit of this is the quality of life and the feel factor, basically. For the last slot, I've just stuck health in there since it's solid and generally useful, although you could go with both mod cost reduction and elemental damage if you want. For the traits, you have a lot of points to work with because we don't need to invest into Kinship despite using explosives because none of them deal friendly fire. And Archon Summoner really doesn't care about skill uptime either because most of their power is coming from their perks. There's a lot of room to invest into bulk via Fortify and Bark Skin, and then you can even go into some stamina help with Endurance and Recovery, which really lets you wear full armor with basically no stamina worries, although you can always go down to medium based on preference. Overall, nothing crazy here either, and your concoction is going to be Bottled Shadeberry just for more mod power. So this build isn't like crazy OP or anything, but I felt like it was worth going over things in more detail since there are a lot of multiple valid directions to take the general concept of this build. So yeah, try them out, decide which one you like more, and enjoy.